So it's Professor Philipp Bagus is the author of a book called Have a copy here, and I'm sure these are available. Stock. Perhaps there is a small stock outside. Philip is Professor of Economics at the University Rey Juan Carlos. I don't know how my Spanish pronunciation is there, in Madrid. He's written a number of books, including Deep Freeze, Iceland's Economic Collapse, and of course, as we've said, The Tragedy of the Euro, which has been translated into 13 languages. Deflation will be published. So let me, on that note, pass the floor to Philip. Thank you very much indeed. We look forward to hearing.
Let me say that the book, they are not a big stock outside, but if you Google it, it's free on PDF in the internet. Well, thank you very much for the nice introduction. Group, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here on the 25th anniversary of the fall of the wall. When it came down in 1989, by surprise, including economists, the Chicago School, Sherwin Rosen stated in 1997, quote, "The collapse of central planning in the past decade has come as a surprise to most of us." And Ronald Coase also stated, "Nothing I had read or known suggested that the collapse was going to occur." Well, there was one the Austrian School of Economics. Because the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises had announced the impossibility already in 1920 in an essay called Die Wirtschaftsrechnung im sozialistischen Gewein. So Murray Rothbard already in 1971 referred to Mises as the prophet of. So in his 1920 essay, Mises the challenge that socialism would bring affluence. He shows that socialism does not lead to a wealthier society, but rather to planned chaos and poverty. He points out that socialism simply cannot work because it makes economic calculation impossible. Even if it were possible to completely altruistic being relentlessly working for the collective, socialism would necessarily, quote, "The impracticability is the result of intellectual, not moral, incapacity. Even angels, if they were endowed with a community." So Mises defined in the means of production. All commodities, intermediate products, machines, infrastructure, and factories are property of the state. Therefore, there are no entrepreneurs that buy and sell intermediate products, that trade commodities, that employ workers, acquire machines, or hold factories in the expectation of earning a profit. Property, they are not traded, and consequently there are no prices, no market prices for them. And obviously, without price, compare the income and the expenditures. It follows that socialist planners cannot choose the most efficient method of production. As Mises puts it, quote, "In the socialist commonwealths, every economic change becomes an undertaking whose success can be neither appraised in advance nor later retrospectively determined. There's only groping in the dark. Socialism is the abolition." Well, let me illustrate it with a simple example. Let's imagine that there are well-intentioned, of course, socialist planners that want to make sure that their subjects do not suffer cold in the winter. They can dispose of all resources, all workers, all resources, and they evaluate three options. I think they could build a wood stove in every house and then command in the winter 25% of workers to cut wood in the forests. Will command 75% of workers on bicycles, producing the electricity necessary to heating the house. And third, the planners, who are very politically correct, consider installing solar panels on the roofs of any house. Which option is the best? Well, each option entails costs. Some options use more silicon and time. Take the bicycle option. 75% of workers bicycling here to produce the heat. These 70% and services while they are bicycling. The stove option, for example, employs only 25%. But then the wood that is burned cannot be used at the same time to produce furniture. And the forests cannot be used. And other costs come, of course, with this. So the socialist planners, they are free to choose the option because they control our resources. But out of the very same reason, there are no prices for labor services, for wood, for silicon, etc. So it's impossible for socialist planners to compare the costs of the options monetarily. The final decision is completely up. If the planners, for example, choose the stove option, the planners cannot know if the produced heat is worth more to the people. It could have been produced with these has been used. So is the heat in the winter more important to people than the goods and services that cannot come into existence in the winter? Would people not prefer to enjoy or wooden furniture? In other words, without market prices, there are no monetary profits and losses. There's no evidence if factors of production have been combined in a wealth-creating manner or if wealth has been squandered. In a market economy, the entrepreneur would suffer losses if the costs of cutting of firewood. But the socialist planners are necessarily blind. Socialism is planned chaos, as Mises says. Chaos, but the central planners have to brush over the individuals and impose their plan. Therefore, Mises totally correct states, every socialist is a disguised dictator. And here in Brussels, I may add, there's a bunch of them. So Mises already in 1920 showed that socialism leads to chaos because rational economics. 20 more years, communists clung to power, accepting an immense capital consumption and empowerment of their people until finally they had to let loose. So it's for Mises' internal fame to have been the first to show that the whole project of socialism, the idea of central planning, that is to improve, is based on a fallacy. As Professor Jesus Huerta de Soto puts it, socialism is an intellectual, theoretically impossible for the agency in charge of implying institutions access to enough information to allow it to issue commands capable of coordinating society. Today, economic calculation in monetary terms is not impossible. Yet, economic calculation is hampered by government interventions that distort prices, likewise leading to chaos today. Regulation calculation not impossible, but they severely distorted, impoverishing society. Recall our example of providing heat in the winter. But the government introduces subsidies for producing energy by bicycling, or regulates the production. An economic calculation obviously will distort it, and again, with these subsidies and regulation, suddenly an option may become optimal because it's simply a waste of resources. So today the threat is not communism anymore. Today the threat is interventionism or statism, a new gentle form of socialism. It is this soft socialism of the paternalistic state that is not only a threat to individual liberties, but by distorting economic calculation leads to a new, more subtle prices are intervened by governments. Minimum wages, maximum rents, distorting tax schedules and government expenditure subsidies, regulations. For instance, this paternalistic state with his always benignant face prohibits us to use certain types of vacuums, certain types of light bulbs. He tells us what we cannot eat, what we cannot drink, what we cannot smoke, which medicine we which methods of production we may not employ, which types of investment we are not allowed to make, and which types of labor contracts or rental agreements we are not allowed to voluntarily agree upon. And if the ever stricter regulations on the national level would not be enough, there has been added another layer of regulations on the European level, which emanates from here, from all the politicians desperately trying to impose a centralized superstate, a new empire on the people of Europe, a Soviet 2.0. Besides this threat, the existing socialism never vanished and is as strong as ever. There, we suffer from massive price distortions, public management of expectations, the central planning of the interest rate and the money supply combined with a nationalist currency. Fiat money and central banking are socialism in money. This system, this monetary system, does not only just redistribution, interventionist spirals, cultural degeneration, and economic crises, but it also finances government expenditures directly and indirectly. Central banking and fiat money have enabled an enormous expansion of the state. The paternalistic state is sponsored by fiat money. And now we got trapped in an interventionist spiral of monetary policy. The ECB has promised to buy as many government bonds as necessary to save the euro. Interest rates are discussed, but the use of cash rates, these mental experiments of central bankers. Consequently, we see already attempts to eliminate cash. Once cash has been abolished, all transactions can be supervised by the state. There will be total control, just in order to satisfy the needs of monetary planners that feel that their are limited by the zero lower bound of interest rates. The total control of transactions would be a new form of totalitarianism, monetary totalitarianism. The Berlin Wall and communism have fallen 25 years ago, but it is not over. We have to be on before. We live in a world of chaos with immense welfare losses. For civilization to thrive, we have to bring down the new soft type of socialism, these walls, right here. And we must also bring down the main sponsor of socialism, itself a center of central planning and managed chaos, central banking and fiat money. Let us hope that we can soon celebrate the complete fall of socialism. Thank you very much.